Walk me through a past project or workstream. Hi everyone, we're here today with Dimitri for another data science behavioral mock interview. Welcome, Dimitri. Can you quickly introduce yourself for our viewers?
Hey, my name is Dimitri. I manage consumer product data science at Opendoor, and I've been building random things in consumer for quite a bit.
Okay, amazing. Plenty of experience for us to draw on. So our question today that we'll be tackling is walk me through a past project or workstream. But before we get started on that, be sure to click the link in the description for Exponent's machine learning interview course. We have a ton of content to help you ace your next interview, including expert coaching, peer-to-peer interviews, and more.
So I think the interview question in this case was talking about a past project or work stream. And I'll start with one that I did about a year or two ago. This was for a company that was in the business buying up and dealing with large-scale commercial equipment, primarily focused in farming and construction, tractors, trailers, things that are like assets that are like $1 to $10 million in size, and running them as part of their business. And the client in this case didn't have any sort of machine learning or analytics team, and they wanted me as an expert to help build a machine learning model that predicted the value of these large scale assets. I came on board. It sounded like a really interesting problem. And I think the first step was understanding, all right, you want machine learning. Everybody at various points wants machine learning. And a lot of founders, let's bring an expert to figure this out. Kind of wanted to answer the question of, what do you need this for? And so the exact request was, we wanted to predict the value of this model in a way that the customer can put in kind of a description and the record of their piece of commercial equipment, and we would be able to generate them a price. So my first step in this case was kind of asking why. Why are we trying to do this? And the answer was to generate more leads. So generally the process of evaluating this equipment accurately took quite a bit of time. You had to inspect the vehicle, do analysis in Excel, etc. And that would give you a pretty accurate price. And then they've seen a bunch of other companies that were able to kind of give you an instantaneous value using machine learning, and wanted to do the same thing. Like, if other people can do it, why can't we? And the motivation was that they could give customers kind of an instant estimate of the value to get their foot in the door so that then they could proceed with the more complicated process. And maybe ideally even get to a point where they didn't need to do this complex underwriting in the first place and could just run everything through a machine learning model and accelerate the process by about 2 to 3x. Fun problem. And I dove right into the data. What I quickly discovered was that based on the way that commercial equipment works, it wasn't really solvable with machine learning.
Why is that?
So, great question. The nature of predictive models in machine learning is that their accuracy scales up with, one, like how much data that you have, and two, how homogeneous that data is. So it turned out that in commercial farm equipment, of all things, one, the volume of it was like just not that high. There was like maybe a couple of million pieces of equipment. And then two, within the space of the things that they were looking to acquire, so farm equipment and construction equipment, there's actually quite a bit of variation. So there wasn't quite as many common threads, which made it hard to predict things with supreme accuracy without running it more complex.
Okay, so you're
and the
saying
end
the
was,
data,
go ahead.
you're saying like the data was really scarce and noisy?
Part of it was the data was scarce and noisy, but part of it was that the data that they had was somewhat scarce and noisy. But an even bigger problem was that at the scale of data that was available for this asset class, there was not enough data to predict with the accuracy that they needed using machine.
Okay. And
In the
how were you
sense,
able to assess that?
so I in their case, so I could tell probably within like 30 minutes to an hour of playing around with the data that like, oh, like this might not be a solvable problem in the first place. But you can't just kind of say that. So I went ahead and I built a machine learning model, pretty basic one to show like what was possible and what it could do. And out of the gate, the model had about like half of the results had an error rate of 30% or more. The median error was 30%.
Okay.
This was already quite a bit better than like a heuristic Excel-based approach or anything else that could calculate it relatively quickly. But it was still very, very far from what like was quote unquote good enough versus other places you could achieve much better results. And kind of walk them through why even improving the quality of the data and maybe gathering additional data that was possible in this space could make this better, but probably not better to the level where it would solve that particular ask that they needed.
Right, because the data is probably pretty difficult to gather in the first place, right?
So there were actually some aggregators, and these guys had done a great job of partnering with people that were able to source the data themselves. They It wasn't great. It was, I think, because like most data problems are, it started out really messy. But the total sum of available data was not at a point where like a basic machine learning model could give the kind of accuracy that would build that. Which is unfortunate.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Super, super fun space. And I think, so yeah, when I first had this hunch and I first surfaced the idea of like, this might not work, naturally there was some pushback. So went ahead, built a model, showed them it's better. It's still just like not quite good enough. And so if you're going to bring somebody a problem, you also have to bring them a solution. And in my case, having asked the question early on of what exactly they were trying to solve for, I also proposed a couple of alternatives. So I proposed we can run this machine learning model, we can get accuracy, we can improve accuracy, but I think the confidence, the time invested into making it better would be X amount, and my confidence of how much better the results would be Y. Maybe it would work. Then I proposed a couple of other solutions as well, including building a tool that, rather than customers providing just the record number for their vehicle, would allow them to provide more information. It would be more friction for the customer. And then rather than calculating a precise value, would rather give the customer an estimate of the value that the product would generate by selling their vehicle and reinvesting it back into their business. So kind of taking the central sales pitch of this company and offering it to the customers in a numerical format. Propose this along with a couple of other alternatives. And client actually really liked this idea, especially after seeing the challenges with the ML-based approach. And so that's ultimately what we ended up building. So as a machine learning data science person, I was able to like get a mock-up off the ground really quickly using Streamlit. Kind of first illustrated how this would work in Excel, aligned it with the business outcomes, put together a basic mock-up of like an actual demo version of this calculator, and then ultimately implemented it directly on their website. And we were able to drive, I think, like a 10 to 20% increase in daily leads using this product, which was really fun.
Yeah, that's really impressive. Yeah. I have some questions about that. So what made you, for this alternative idea, what made you think that it might be easier to predict how much value the customer would get from reinvesting that value into their business instead of just straight up predicting like the price of the vehicle?
Totally. So we fundamentally shifted from a problem that was like fairly hard to predict to a problem that was pretty easy to predict. It did require the customer giving quite a bit more information up front, but rather than us predicting the value, We started with a rough estimate of the value, which a lot of people have, and illustrated more, honestly, in like basic financial calculator terms. If a customer just took the 2 million that was stuck in the asset and invested into growing their business,
Mhm.
and expected their business to grow at a particular rate, how much that would generate for them. Effectively, the selling the underlying pitch of the business, which was, we allow you to allocate your capital more efficiently. We
Mhm.
take assets from you that like don't necessarily make sense for you to own, and then
Mhm.
offering them to a different organization where it might be.
Yeah, okay. And I see that it doesn't require as much of the assumption that that price estimate is like super precise anymore.
Yeah. And it also saves a lot of, reduce the risks of breaking customer trust
Mhm.
by giving them an estimate that seems unreasonable.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Okay, so then I'm curious, how did mentioned that it requires a lot of the client to provide a lot of information upfront. How did you go about like actually building out this model of how much value they would get from reinvesting that value? Like, did you have to build a custom model for every customer, or was it just kind of like an Excel spreadsheet type of thing? Can you tell me more about that?
Um, it was a little bit silly. I actually ended up building a basic Excel sheet. I worked with somebody to understand what is the value that you're trying to offer. And the underlying math turned out to be a pretty simple set of assumptions and a pretty basic financial calculator, of, you take an asset that costs a lot of money, um, that like maybe generates X value, and you get rid of that asset and you reinvest that value into your business and growing and scaling up your business. You would expect investing $1 million into growing your business to generate more value than, for example, like a tractor, or something else that is really expensive to hold, but like doesn't necessarily generate that much value on its own. So working with the client, pretty quickly figured out how the math works, mocked it up in Excel. Excel version worked. And then in a couple of hours, mocked it up in Python, and illustrated how it would work on the site.
Mm.
Um, the nice part about being able to code is that I was able to actually just quickly build out an endpoint, um, that then the engineers could construct the actual site, and all they needed to do was send the inputs that they generated to my endpoint, and I would be able to retrieve and show them all of the results. So the work to launch this calculator was really quick, and we were able to finish the entire project from selling the customer on the idea to mocking it up about a week, and then from mocking it up to getting it launched in another week and a half.
Yeah, wow, that's really efficient to build that from like start to end, basically. Yeah. So I'm curious on what was the biggest challenge of this process?
Convincing people that wanted machine learning that they didn't actually need machine learning.
What do you think was some of the friction there? Was it that it's just a really popular technique now and they are like buying into the hype?
I think it's a great question. I feel like you see the same thing happening around right now a lot with like large language models, where everybody's really excited about this new shiny tool. And this
Mhm.
new shiny tool is really powerful, in a lot of places where it's useful. And everybody wants a generative AI strategy. Like a couple of years ago, everybody wanted a machine learning strategy. Um, the unfortunate detail is there's some places where these techniques work really, really well and deliver a tremendous amount of value. And like some businesses, in which case, like this thing is transformative. And if you don't start implementing these things, then you're just gonna fall behind, right? Like businesses, like, I don't know, banks aren't doing automated underwriting, or certain other businesses that are like so dependent, where this technology is so transformational that you have to get it working. Um, but every executive ends up asking them the question of like, how am I implementing this? And the reality is that in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense. But convincing people that, hey, in your case, this problem is best solved using a slightly different approach, and then most importantly, still offering them a solution um, is a great way to generate value without making people too annoyed.
Yeah, and I like that approach that you didn't just bring them a problem, you also proposed an alternative that ended up being like super viable and efficient to implement as well. So I'm curious, was there anything particularly new that you learned from this case?
I think a couple of things. One, I did learn that not all problems are solvable with ML. I think at this point, I actually went into it being super excited. And then only like this was how I learned about some of the limitations. But two, I think I would have like started even earlier with kind of proposing alternate solutions. Uh, and
Okay,
yeah,
started earlier, as in instead of like spending as much time invested into the ML model.
yeah. I think early on, I think for the first time I talked with the customer in this case, it was like, hey, this doesn't work. And I got like mixed reactions, and only then I like went back. Obviously, I just can't tell somebody that something doesn't work. Let me pitch them on something that can solve their underlying problem.
Okay, got it. Okay, Dimitri, that was a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for answering this for us today. I think we've learned a lot from you. So I think this is a great place for us to pause and go into a little bit of analysis of this interview. I'm curious to hear from you. If you were the interviewer, what do you think went well, and what do you think you would have done differently?
I think the story and the narrative itself was great. And I think I was able to address kind of a number of the underlying and follow-up questions. In terms of what went better, what could have gone better, I think I could have done a better job of structuring the answers in a way that demonstrated the impact. And then I think diving more into the actual details of what had gotten through and kind of like elevating the believability and impact of what I did in this particular situation. I think I was vague in a couple of other places. And I know that when I'm in the boat of somebody interviewing, vague answers give me the suggestion that somebody didn't actually do anything at all. Like concreteness while focusing on the impact really goes a long way. I know I personally also have the tendency to talk in circles sometimes. And taking a pause, formulating my answer, and being more structured moving forward, I think would have also amplified the effectiveness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like giving a high level summary first before then delving into some of the details and then talking about the overall takeaways, right? It helps to have that structure. But there were a lot of things I liked about this interview. I really enjoyed that you mentioned the first approach you went with and then talked about how like, oh, like you actually think this approach didn't really work that well. And then you used that to illustrate how one of the fundamental assumptions of the client ask was perhaps a little misguided, and that you were able to then get to the root of like what they're actually asking for. Because what they're actually asking for is, maybe not perhaps the ML model itself, but just helping them generate more leads. And that's really the fundamental problem that you have to solve. And it doesn't have to be solved with ML. And I really like that you showed that in this case you had solid evidence for backing up your conclusion of like why ML wasn't that helpful in this case. You had built a model, you showed them like even if you like increase the amount of data, like this data is already like this data perhaps is just not going to get us to the levels of accuracy that we need. And you were able to propose this alternative that really eliminated the need for such a precise estimation, of the vehicle cost. Yeah, and I agree with you. Sometimes details can help a little bit. I ended up like asking you some clarifying questions anyways, as I think any interviewer would if they didn't quite know the details of what you were talking about. So that's okay. But yeah, overall, I think we've learned a lot from you today. Yeah, what do you think?
Totally. I think thinking back to interviews of the structure, it's something that really works for me and something that I enjoy and I know seems to work consistently is talking through projects and work that you were excited about and invested in.
Yeah.
And this is one of those for me. Like this was fun. It was an interesting problem. It was a headache at various points along the way, but ultimately it was it was just fun. And I think like kind of engagement and passion and like kind of the, can I say give a shit factor,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
really feel like it carries a lot in interviews. And it also helps a lot with the follow-up questions, uh, steeped in your memory.
Yeah.
You know the details, you know the work that you put
Exactly.
in, you saw the
Yeah.
results.
What do you think made it so fun for you? Like, why did you find this one so easy to care about?
I mean, I think the complexity of it and like kind of the narrative arc for the whole piece, the like needing to persuade people that actually you don't need this thing entirely. Here's like a completely alternate solution, and actually being able to carry that solution forward. Also, I think like just being able to move quickly and deliver some results, like create something, get something off the ground. I personally really love 0 to 1 problems, just because of like the speed and the iteration cycles. And in this case, uh, taking startups where like a lot of analytics and machine learning doesn't exist yet, and just adding a lot of value is, for me personally, something that I really enjoy, even if it doesn't happen in a way that it was originally planned.
Yeah, I could tell it's probably very satisfying to then be able to propose that alternate solution and have it like implemented and working within basically a week. It's very impressive. And it was quite the roller coaster of a story. So I was really glad that you were able to tell us the story of like the approaches that didn't work as well as the approaches that did work and how you got there in the first place. I think that was really illustrative of your problem solving skills. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And thank you, Dimitri, for being here. If any of you have upcoming interviews, good luck. Bye, everyone.